Right, so October 7th, 2023 is frequently referred to in Israeli political and military discourse as a day of unprecedented horror. And there's no argument there, really, is there? The coordinated assault led by Hamas on southern Israel resulted in the deaths of over 1,100 Israelis, most of them civilians, and shattered the illusion of invulnerability that the Israeli state had cultivated over decades. The attack exposed systemic vulnerabilities in what was widely regarded as the Middle East's most sophisticated intelligence and defence apparatus. Yet nearly 2 years afterwards, amidst much cracking of the story already, from the Hannibal Directives Israel apparently issued to eyewitness accounts claiming IDF tanks and gunships were targeting their own people, to all the warnings of a Hamas plot having been handed to Israel in the days and weeks before, even bigger cracks in the story are now beginning to show in the narrative that this was all a complete surprise to Israel. A testimony from one soldier in particular right now, but taken with others we've had from other soldiers, survivors, and analysts, are painting a far more disturbing picture now. Not one of total blindness, but of ignored intelligence, cancelled standard military procedures, delayed responses, and a state that has consistently refused to allow any meaningful independent investigation into what actually happened that night. And at the heart of this now is a growing body of evidence and a question that refuses to go away with it. If Israel has nothing to hide, then why is it hiding everything? Right, so the foundation of the official Israeli account is that October 7th was a shock to them, an unforeseeable act of savagery by Hamas. But mounting evidence demonstrates that this was not a surprise at all to Israel in operational terms. There were warnings, many of them explicit, credible, and urgent. Israeli surveillance spotters, many of them young female soldiers apparently stationed in outposts along the Gaza border, repeatedly alerted their superiors about Hamas military exercises that clearly resembled preparations for an assault. They reported live fire training, trench digging, and simulations of raids on kibbutzim. These warnings were not hypothetical or ambiguous, they were timely, specific, and documented. Yet their concerns were repeatedly dismissed as exaggerated or hysterical. The failure did not stop at the lower echelons of the chain of command either, though. In July of 2023, before everything kicked off, of course, on October 7th, Israel's own elite signals intelligence unit, Unit 8200, produced a report known as the Jericho Wall. This report outlined a probable Hamas assault plan that matched almost precisely the tactics used on October 7th. Coordinated rocket barrages and drone interference and border breaches using explosives and rapid infiltration via motorcycles and the such like. That such a document was not acted upon reveals either astonishing arrogance or a refusal to believe that Palestinians could coordinate such an operation. A form of institutional racism cloaked in strategic hubris, perhaps. But adding to this damning picture is the report that Egypt's General Intelligence Directorate warned Israeli officials 3 days prior to the attack. The Egyptian government claimed that the warning was delivered clearly and urgently, warning of an imminent large-scale operation by Hamas. Benjamin Netanyahu initially denied receiving any such alert, only for later statements from Israeli intelligence sources to admit that a warning had in fact been delivered, but was considered too vague to act upon. Whether this was a misjudgment or a conscious dismissal remains one of the many in a long line of unanswered questions, doesn't it? But perhaps the most shocking revelation is what has now just come out, though. An Israeli soldier called Shalom Shitrit has testified before the Knesset that his unit had received a strange and uncharacteristic order, and that was to cancel the morning patrols of the Gaza border fence on October the 7th. This testimony, as reported by the Cradle, has gone largely unaddressed by official channels, and needless to say, the mainstream media as well. These early morning patrols were a routine, non-negotiable component of border security. They provided physical eyes on the ground to monitor for sabotage, infiltration, and suspicious activity that might escape even the most advanced surveillance technology. To cancel such patrols on any morning, let alone a holiday morning when forces were already understaffed, defies every logic of standard military protocol, doesn't it? Given the pre-existing intelligence reports and warnings, this order is very difficult to just be written off as a mere oversight. The precise timing between 5:20 and 9 a.m. coincides exactly with the time of the breach. This suggests either a catastrophic intelligence lapse or a deliberate stand down, and neither explanation absolves the Israeli military or political leadership of responsibility there. In fact, it raises the possibility that the state permitted it, or at least risked a limited breach to justify a broader agenda, which we've seen play out ever since, arguably. The horror of October 7th was not limited to the initial attack either. It was compounded by the delay and inadequacy of the military response too. Survivors from Be'eri and Kfar Aza and Nir Oz have described how they hid in safe rooms for hours while Hamas fighters moved freely through their communities. They sent voice messages and live locations and desperate pleas to emergency services and the IDF. Many received no response. Some were apparently told to stay quiet and wait. Multiple survivors report seeing Israeli drones and helicopters overhead, but received no protection. In several cases, residents have claimed that their loved ones were killed not just by Hamas, but by Israeli tank shells and helicopter attacks which targeted their homes in which both militants and civilians were present. So this feeds into the growing concern that the Hannibal Directive, that controversial Israeli military protocol that authorises the use of overwhelming force to prevent soldier abductions, even at the cost of the hostage's life if needs be, had been invoked. A July 2024 report by Al Jazeera suggested that the directive was very much used on October 7th, and indeed subsequent to that, the former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant admitted as much. Knowing this, it means we know that the Israeli military authorised operations that knowingly endangered and possibly killed Israeli civilians on that night. Therefore, it is entirely believable, is it not, that Israel permitted this Hamas operation to actually happen and play out, given the value they appear to place on the lives even of their own people. If such a doctrine as the Hannibal Directive still exists, they don't have much value in the lives of their own people, do they? So to understand why Israel might have failed to act on the warnings it received, it's worth looking at the political climate in the months leading up to the attack, and why this may have all come about. Netanyahu's government was besieged by mass protests, driven by his controversial judicial overhaul. Thousands of reservists, including pilots and intelligence officers, had pledged to withdraw from duty. His cabinet was fractured, his international standing diminished, his corruption trial loomed large over his head as well. And then came October 7th. Within hours, the protest movement collapsed. The opposition rallied behind the government. Military funding surged. Media scrutiny vanished. Netanyahu went from embattled leader to wartime prime minister. The aftermath allowed Israel to launch its deadliest assault on Gaza to date under the legitimising banner of self-defence. As Press TV have observed, the only other outlet I've actually noticed has covered this testimony by Shalom Sheetrit at this moment in time, at time of writing, the attack gave the Israeli government carte blanche to do what it had long wanted to do: destroy Hamas, neutralise Palestinian resistance, and reassert regional dominance. Whether or not the attack was allowed to happen, it is undeniable that it was awfully politically expedient for Benjamin Netanyahu. Given the scale of the catastrophe, one might expect a nation to launch a transparent, independent inquiry to identify what went wrong and prevent it from happening again. Yet Israel has done the opposite, hasn't it? Military reviews have been kept secret. The testimonies of survivors and whistleblowers have been ignored. Calls for an independent civilian-led commission have been met with silence or derision. This refusal is perhaps the clearest indication that there's something to hide here. If the government had truly been blindsided, it would have every incentive to demonstrate that it did everything possible. Instead, it circled wagons, protected high-level officials, and buried critical testimony. So the message this sends is unmistakable. Transparency would be more damaging to Israel than silence. The war in Gaza, launched in response to October 7th, has killed tens of thousands, displaced millions, and created a humanitarian catastrophe that the UN and major NGOs describe as amongst the worst in recent memory. If the moral foundation of this war was built on a preventable or permitted attack, then everything that has followed has been built on a lie. That includes the entire siege of Gaza, the bombing of hospitals, the starvation blockade, the targeted assassinations of Palestinian leaders. Everything that has been done to Gaza and to its people will have been built on deceit. Under international law, a state that wages war based on manufactured or manipulated pretexts is culpable not only for the war itself, but for the crimes committed during it. If Israeli leadership knowingly risked its own civilian lives to launch a war of political convenience, it would represent one of the gravest breaches of trust in modern history, and given all of it would have been done for Benjamin Netanyahu's political expediency only, he would surely end up going down as one of the most evil men in history. The only way to restore a measure of trust and accountability is through a full, independent international investigation. This inquiry must be empowered to obtain classified intelligence, compel testimony from military and political officials, and review the decisions made in the hours and days leading up to the attack. It must investigate why the Jericho Wall report was ignored. It must examine who gave the stand-down order. It must explore why the Hannibal Directive was ever invoked. And it must place all of this within the broader political context of a state apparatus that stood to benefit from a crisis. Anything less is not just inadequate, it's complicit. The State of Israel has claimed to act on behalf of its people, but in the wake of October 7th, it has refused to explain why those people were left to die. It has suppressed testimonies, buried documents, and blocked independent scrutiny. We must all demand that the right questions be asked. Why were border patrols cancelled on the very morning of the attack? Why were repeated warnings ignored? Why was the military response so catastrophically slow? And most damningly, why is the state so afraid of answering these questions? In the end, the issue is not only what Hamas did, and in no way have I sought to minimise that at all here, but it is equally important to find out exactly what Israel failed to do as well, and what it may have done to itself, and the reasons behind that. Because if there's nothing to hide, then Israel simply must stop hiding. The longer they do so, the more guilty they inevitably look as well. Adding further fuel to this fire that Israel insists on lighting under itself, though, are the reports that have come out from Israeli organisations in the form of B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights Israel that have directly accused their own nation now of committing genocide. These reports are absolutely excoriating, but if we find out going forwards that everything they contain has been built on a lie, it adds a whole new dimension to matters. We need that independent investigation. Nations globally must call for it. But meanwhile, check out the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping support the channel at the same time, which is absolutely very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.